Hi, I'm Chitra.
I'm Madhvi.
I am Jyoti.
I'm Padmaja.
Together, we are your hosts.
On the Aedge podcast.
We bring you stories and experiences.
From our experiments around learning, marketing, and design.
These are stories of people, technology,
And people interacting through technology.
Of what we see, create,
And recommend.
Does anyone other than a branding expert really understand what branding is all about? This is a thought that always came to my mind, even though I've been part of branding exercises. I never really paid attention to what it was all about until I found myself being part of an organization where branding was a key service offering. Added to that, there are innumerable articles and a plethora of knowledge that's available around branding. So I thought, how about having a conversation with Linda Jacob, my colleague at Clearly Blue, who is our resident branding expert and who came into branding via her own unique experiences. Not as a branding specialist, more like she stumbled into it, and being someone who naturally observes the process today has her own brand of branding. Listen on to find out more. Hi Linda.
Hi Chitra.
This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for quite some time because we said we're about learning, marketing, and design. So, one aspect of marketing that I'm looking forward to having conversations with you today is around branding. Branding as a means of helping people to understand a company, what it does, its purpose, its values, its offering has been around for years and years and years. I would say even thousands of years. And I am quite curious about how you came to be doing what you do around branding for companies. So that is definitely going to be part of this conversation. And what have been some of your experiences and what is it that you can share with our listeners around this topic?
Okay, Chitra. So, branding is something it was very serendipitous. I happened to attend branding workshops with some of my colleagues, and I found it interesting to hear conversations. And then I participated in a branding workshop as the representative of another company where I was at the other end of the table. So in one case, I was with a group of people who were facilitating a branding workshop. And in another couple of cases, I was part of the team that had to answer the questions to develop the brand. And both sides of the table looked very interesting to me. When I first heard the questions that a facilitator or a brand expert would ask the client, what I felt was it was like, meeting somebody for the first time and getting introduced to them and trying to understand who they are as a person. So most of the time when you are asked to build a website or build collateral for a brand, whether they have a brand book or a brand guideline, as a design team and a marketing team, because we are both and we most of the time go together, we have to understand the client. We have to understand their vision, where they want to be going, what their customer persona is, who are they talking to, who are their audience, who do they want to represent themselves as, which is actually questions that you ask a new acquaintance when you meet them for the first time. When you shake your hands with a person that you're meeting for the first time, maybe in a conference or a meeting or even at home, you say, hi, how are you? Who are you? What is your name? What are you doing? Right? These are the questions we ask. I consider a branding exercise to be an extension of that conversation. It is like we as a company getting introduced to you as a brand and understanding you as a brand. And then it would be like me after getting introduced to you, Chitra. I met you for the first time. I talked to you. I understand what you were doing and all that. And then I meet somebody else and I then talk about Chitra to that person. So I am actually taking the essence of Chitra and going and talking to a third person about who Chitra is and representing Chitra in a certain way. That's my simplistic approach to branding.
That's very beautifully put. In fact, coincidentally, it was exactly the same thoughts that were coming to my mind when you were describing how you discover a company.
Yeah.
It's much like how you discover a person, isn't it?
Exactly. And actually branding at the essence of it is humanizing the brand, because marketeers and marketing gurus over the years have realized that people connect only with people. Whether it's, so if you, let's say you're a B2B enterprise, which is what Clearly Blue normally does, right? You would think that a company talks to a company. So it is like two gigantic inhuman things talking to each other. Sorry, that doesn't work. You as the company's representative are talking to another company where another human is hearing. It could be the C-suite. It could be whoever is the buyer in that particular company. And that buyer, contrary to what we all believe, is interested in the features, benefits, solutions, everything that you as a potential, vendor or solutions provider wants to provide. But he or she will only connect with the human communication that you bring to the table. We can talk about anything else, but I think, Chitra, you agree with me. You only buy into a brand if you can understand the brand and if you actually like the brand as if it were a person, right? Otherwise, you don't trust. So for a human being, trust comes from understanding and recognizing that this is a similar person, not a similar inanimate object. We don't trust and we do not give loyalty to inanimate objects. That's why all the big brands in the world, I feel, have developed their own character, which is very human-like. Because as humans, we can only connect to another human being. We cannot connect to anything else.
What's a brand that you identify with? It could be anything.
What is a brand that I identify with? Oh my God, Chitra, you've put me in trouble. So actually, when I joined Clearly Blue, I didn't realize that I do identify with the brand. Okay? But I do. I've realized that the ethos of the company, and even, for God's sake, the owl that we have, I identify with it, right? So I do identify with that. If you ask me for any other brand that I identify with, I don't know. I can talk to you about a brand archetype that I think I identify with, an everyman. I think I'm a very everyman kind of person who can go and sneak myself into a corner and sit there.
Interesting, and I'm going to come back to that question later about archetypes and what happens when you actually introduce people to the concept of an archetype. But before that, I remember being in a conversation with a client just a couple of days ago, and somebody asked, what does adeptic mean? And the minute we said that it means enabling people to become adept at what they do, it really was an aha moment for me personally, because I was telling the story behind our brand, which is what we want people in the workplace to be by consuming any of the Adeptic learning products that we have. And it was so easy to just say it. It came out in one sentence. We said we want people to be adept at what they do, and therefore Adeptic. Of course, the follow-on story to that was, finding a domain name that was unique, etc. But all that was aside, the reaction or the response from people who were listening to us was an immediate connect. So I see the need to humanize what it is.
Definitely. Unless you humanize it, we don't connect with it. We don't understand it. We might say that we are intellectual beings and we think with our intellect, and we look at features and we look at benefits. And Chitra, you are a very scientific, intellectual person who looks at things or tries to look at things very, very neutrally. But I think what we all have to admit to is, unless you connect with the person at the other end of the table, and that person can be a brand, anything, and that has to be something that is a human connection, it doesn't go through.
So would you say that's one of the lessons, and we'll come back to that a little later, that any person who is trying to help an individual or an organization with a branding exercise needs to be aware of?
Yes, and I think if you want to build yourself as a brand expert or learn to do a branding exercise, I personally feel you should be inherently curious about what makes the other person or the other company tick. And that curiosity, because most of the time branding exercises are long drawn out affairs. So recently I went into a branding exercise where the Spock at the other end told me that, oh Linda, 2.5 hours of all my big leaders coming into a room and spending their time with you. Are you going to give them some activities? You can't keep on asking them questions. They might not want to answer it. So she was very anxious about it. And I started thinking to myself, yes, that's true, right? I'm this weird person who goes into a room and starts asking questions like, why did you start this? Where are you going? And most of the time, people are like, why should we answer all these questions? What does it matter?
It's funny because if you just flip the scenario to a social setting and you had to meet those same people, let's say in an informal environment outside somewhere, and you were to ask them the same questions, they would be more than enthusiastic to respond
Exactly,
to you, right?
yeah. So that's exactly what you should do in a branding exercise. I personally feel a branding exercise should be a personal exercise where you talk to the individuals. So the 3 or 4 people that come together in a branding exercise are actually the people that represent the company that you are trying to build the brand for. Those people are essentially the essence of the company. And if they're not the essence of the company and your Spock or whoever is facilitating this exercise makes a mistake of calling just a few random people to do the exercise, it's gone. You won't get a brand archetype, you won't get a brand message, you won't get a brand voice that you want. It'll be something or the other. So the people that come in should be people that actually have a say or have imbibed the ethos of the company. I wouldn't even say that you have to get the founders of the company or anything, but they should be people who have spent sufficient amount of time in the company to have imbibed the brand and who actually own the brand and actually walk and talk the brand. You don't need to be a founder for that. You just need to be a person who is so aligned to the brand that you know what it is.
Or someone who has connected so well with the workplace has perhaps even found that what that organization is doing is very close to their own purpose.
Yeah.
Or is helping them achieve their purpose.
Absolutely.
And very often, if you see, this is very interesting because very often as a coach and even someone who has helped to define goals for an organization, we always say that purpose, that goal, if it ties into purposes of individuals, then you know that the organization is geared towards success.
Absolutely. So the fact of the matter is an organization, again, I'm sorry to simplify this, an organization is actually the composite of its individuals.
Yes.
And an organization that grows is an organization that is aligned towards the same goal and vision and is going towards the same purpose. You can have, and I strongly believe that, and I don't know whether we are digressing with this conversation, Chitra, I strongly believe that an organization need not necessarily be a composite of like people. It should be a diverse set of individuals. But the diverse set of individuals need to be able to work together cohesively towards a single goal. And it could be that they work in different ways. And I think you and I are typical examples for it. I think we are as different as we could possibly be, right? But I think there is an alignment in the way we think. And we are working towards a common goal. You and I agree to disagree on 9 out of the 10 topics we talk about, but there is that one thing that we have a common goal or purpose towards, which makes us able to work together. So you and I going into a branding session representing Adeptic or Clearly Blue would work, right? And I think that's what you need in a branding session. When a facilitator is bringing together people to a branding session, it would be preferable if they don't bring like people together. It could be people who are like us, who are so different that we will argue, but who they would always have a common goal. And those kind of conversations are actually more interesting. I went into a branding session about 2-3 years ago with one company that brought in 8 representatives to the meeting. And it was one of my earlier branding sessions. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with all of these people? And how am I going to figure out? So we normally go into these branding sessions with 2-3 people and 2 of them mostly designers, because God knows what colors and schemes they want to put into the picture. There were these 8 individuals who came into this meeting, and I was like, what am I going to do with them? I don't know how to get information from them. I had designers with me and they were like, Linda, how are we going to figure out what is happening? The brand archetype, figuring out the brand archetype, and it took us 2 sessions of 1.5 hours each. We had to go in, and this was during COVID times, so it was all online. Okay, it took us another 3rd session to find their brand positioning, their brand voice, their user persona, and all of that. But what I learned from that exercise is all of these people were very passionate about their organization from various individuals. One was a scientist, one was an accountant, one was a teacher, and this was an NGO that they had found together. So naturally, as you would normally assume, right, Chitra, in NGO, you would have people from different experiences, different life places. They come together and they're going towards a single little goal. We found a brand archetype for them. We did their brand book. And it was one of the most satisfying experiences I've had, though the most difficult. But I think it became so satisfying because they argued about everything. So much so that I had to do a pivot table for the brand archetype. They had so many options. Right.
Yeah.
But it was good. It was good.
So, coming to this topic of, I think we've covered some very interesting aspects, Linda. It is about how you get people together, who they should be, what kind of points of view they need to bring to the table, and how all of that contributes towards the creation of a good brand, so to speak. So, going a little bit into some of the details of it, what is the importance or the essence of helping people understand what their brand archetype is? What is it?
So a lot of people feel that it's not necessarily, and yeah, it's not really. But what it does is it helps your marketing and design teams later on, right? Otherwise, you'll be saying the same thing again and again to a whole host of people. So your brand archetype is the humanization of your brand. So all of us have personas. Like if you speak to a person for maybe half an hour or 1 hour, normally after a certain level of experience, you form an impression in your mind about who that person is, right? You think to yourself that, oh, this is this kind of a person, more of an introvert or maybe an extrovert, very jolly. Don't we go out there and say, oh, this person is so jolly and good to talk to. He'll carry the party forward. Or oh, he'll just sit in a corner. Or he's more of the thinking kind. This guy is very scientific. This lady is amazing. Right? We'll say things like that based on our impressions. With a brand, because a brand doesn't have the human bit of it, you have to build it. You have to give the brand all the human elements that make the brand human. You have to give the brand a bit of a voice. So you have to say that your brand should talk in this language. Your brand can be jolly, cheerful. You can be an M&M, okay? Or you can decide to say that, no, my brand should be authoritative. It should be like the Mercedes-Benz, right? Or you can say that my brand should be a lover, should be more like a very, very sensual perfume per se. So your brand should actually evoke an emotion in the person who encounters the brand. What the emotion is depends upon what you're trying to sell or what you're trying to communicate. And who are you trying to attract to listen to what you're saying? The brand archetype, the way I look at it is the way, and it's very difficult. You can't go to a client and say, okay, should your brand archetype talk this way, do this, dance this way, shake hands this way? It's better to give them like cards that say, okay, do you want, and normally we advise brands that brand archetypes should not be a single archetype. So brand archetypes are like, for example, some of the brand archetypes, when I name, you would understand them: the magician, the ruler, the sage, the everyman, okay, the creator. The magician and the sage, for example, are people that might, the sage obviously is the knowledgeable person. The magician is a person who might transform something for people, right? The everyman is your friendly everyman who will help you do stuff and will walk along with you wherever you're going, will accompany you on your journey. IKEA actually says that they are the everyman. Have you noticed the way the products that they show you, they invite you into their their showroom, yeah. And they invite you to sit on the sofa. They don't say that the sofa is kept far away and you can't touch it. They let you experience it because they feel that they are one with you. That's every man, isn't it? So brands actually speak and talk the way that their archetype is, they are able to connect with you with that human touch.
So this just got me thinking, because I worked for so many years in tech. I'm wondering, are tech people more like sages?
So that's so interesting.
With so much of wisdom and a lot of, especially tech I worked in tech companies that built infrastructure. And I think the first thing that people who bought your products or rather invested in your product had to know that you were trustworthy, you were reliable, that you would respond to them in their time of need. And these typically are organizations that are running critical operations at the back, rather enabling infrastructure for the organization to function the way it ought to be functioning. And it mattered that you were able to relate to their problem space, which could be pretty complex in most cases. It could be that you understand your customer, typical in a B2B space, and so on. And that's the thing that came to my mind is that would be a sage.
It would be a sage. But interestingly, do you know what? A lot of clients that we've worked with in the SaaS space identify themselves to the magician.
That could be the
Transformation.
innovator,
The transformation. So I would have expected them to actually identify or ally themselves to maybe the creator. Oh, right. That's Lego, for example, right? But surprisingly, when you talk about the archetypes and give them like the brand voices that align with it and all that, a lot of the SaaS tech companies that we work with sort of gravitate towards the magician. And I think that is because technologists, I think at heart, believe that technology is magic.
That's wonderful. In many ways. And I think in people's minds also, that's how people relate to.
Yeah. So for me, because I'm not a technology person, for me it's magic. So I agree with them.
It's funny. I think I'm coming to this conversation with my own bias, I suppose, where, having dealt with customers like that, they want an assurance.
So they want
to be able to trust you.
Yeah. So most of the time, they relate to a combination of the magician with something else, like maybe the sage, very true, the sage, or even the explorer, something which is more grounded. Okay, I have never seen a technology company think that they are the outlaw, which is the Harley Davidsons of the world.
Oh, wow.
Okay. But yeah, so somehow or the other, your own personality seeps in.
Isn't the Harley Davidson an explorer in some ways? You would get onto a Harley Davidson and go and explore.
Yeah. And I think maybe Harley Davidson themselves are changing. So the other thing about branding is brand archetypes change through the years. Okay. You start as a brand and then it's like human. See, one of the things we should always understand, and that's the beauty of brands. Consider that the brand is a human version of your company. And as human beings, we also change. Okay. I might have started out as something else maybe many years ago. And now I'm something else today. The same with you, right, Chitra? I think you might have been an outlaw before and now you're a sage, right? Okay. I don't know what I was before, but I think I'm more of the joker and the lover types now. Okay. So
in some sense, it's as we as humans, whether we like to admit it or not, we do evolve. And companies also evolve.
Exactly.
And then I have a question for you though. How easy or how difficult is it for companies to take that decision about rebranding when they know that they have reached a certain stage where they need to?
So the thing I feel is that it is a natural evolution, and especially when you have a combination. That's why we always advise clients to take a combination of two brand archetypes. Like you take two. You say that you are a magician and a sage, for example, or you say that you're a caregiver and a creator. That could be a very good thing for a health tech company. A caregiver brand is a hospital health brand, and the creator is the innovator. So if I had a client who's a startup in the health tech industry, and what we finally decided on was the combination of a caregiver and a creator. So he was toggling between creator and magician, by the way. Okay, so the magician is something which is a hook for the technologists. But see, you have the two brands, and there are people who have three. So after some time, what happens is as you progress in your growth as a company and you gain authority, you might decide that you want a combination of the ruler there, for example, because you've become the authoritative person or you are the first person who's got to that space, right? You can even decide that I want to leave away the caregiver and I want to become a sage. So and because your brand voice isn't the brand voice of just one of the archetypes, it's just a slight tweaking of your brand voice and maybe your message. And like our design experts tell you, your logo and everything needs a refresh after 5 to 6 years. It needn't be that you change the logo completely, but that you sort of align it to the latest trends. They come back and tell you weird things like, oh, nowadays we don't have this style, the gradient doesn't work and all that, Chitra. But they know what they're talking about, the design experts, right? So I think it works. I don't think it's such a big, painful exercise as we would think it is, because it is natural for us to grow and evolve and change.
That's very heartening to hear, and I hope a lot of our listeners who could be coming from anywhere and from any industry are actually listening to this, because I often hear the other side of the story, and now I'm wondering, are they more worried about the effort that goes or the process behind the change versus the change itself?
I think it is the change itself. Again, it's a very human tendency to actually
resist any change.
Resist change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So, when oftentimes, as is any process of discovery, it is iterative. And it's almost like you are building one on top of the other, and to help people actually see what is emerging often takes time.
Oh,
it's
yes.
difficult, right? So what are some of those tips or techniques that you can share with our listeners that have helped you bring, people of diverse thoughts, passionate people who have different points of view, and towards, somewhere everything has to converge towards actually creating your brand, getting the colors right, or rather building the brand book. What are some of those tips and techniques that you use to help people move towards those points of convergence?
So what I think the biggest thing is the facilitator, the brand expert should not add their own biases and thoughts into the mix, which is very difficult not to. Okay, because when you think about a brand, because you've gone through this exercise many times, you already have very definitive ideas in your mind, which might be correct for the brand also. But you always have to step back, at least in the first initial couple of meetings, allowing the entire team to work towards to come to an understanding. I enjoy working with teams where all of them have a voice and they all talk equally. I've gone into meetings where only the leader, there would be a de facto leader who would talk and everybody else says yes. That's brand exercise gone wrong at the beginning, because whatever you say, a single voice will then represent that person as that person's individual choice, and however well they know their company and their customer, etc., when you ultimately create the brand, they will be creating a brand which is like an identity or a reflection of that person. Not a good idea at all. So whenever I go into a brand exercise, first thing is learn to keep mum myself, not put in my ideas into the mix, because after a few exercises and after you've done it a few times, you unknowingly think you know it, right? So keep quiet. But then after a certain period of time, so I've gone into brand exercises where, because of this leadership thing, they said that they want a certain archetype. They agreed to a certain thing. They came out and they were a certain kind of company, but the archetype they chose did not have any relationship to their customer or user persona. At that point in time, as a brand expert, you have to jump in and actually articulate what you think. If you think that they're not going in the right direction, then if you keep mum, you're not doing your work. So you do have to nudge them. But I would only do that if I felt that it was veering off in an entirely different direction that would not help them. The other place where a lot of clients have needed help is attaching a color palette to their brand. Very difficult to do, especially if you're talking to a group of engineers, which has been my pleasure to do, because they tend to veer to certain colors, Chitra, right? And taking them away from those colors sometimes is very difficult to do, because they like, for example, my husband only wears blue shirts. Okay, and he's a typical engineer. You ask him to wear anything with any other color, he's going to go crazy. Imagine him being in a brand exercise. The only thing he would see is the blue. Okay, let's have a brand palette with blue.
Just to contrast that with my partner, he is comfortable in an array of colors.
Maybe we should put them together in a brand.
And see what happens. But as engineering centric, a very, very engineering oriented mind, and Yes, I've noticed that as well.
That the blue seems to be the color.
Blues, the greys,
Yeah.
blacks, and an occasional green somewhere.
Yeah. Pink, orange, blue, pink, orange, red. Yeah. So, but that's stereotypical again, right? So, what I'm trying to say over here is what we normally do for a brand exercise is when they start getting confused with the colors that the designer comes up with, we actually put them into into an artifact, like maybe a social media creative or a banner of an email, so that they can see how the colors play together, to see how it would represent their company. That actually makes them think and agree to something.
So I have this question coming up the minute you said that. I'm somebody who responds to language and phrases and words, not so much the color. And I'm sure, based on what you just said, some people respond to color. And when they see color with the language, then there's a different. So it's almost like different people respond to messages or the creative in different ways.
Yes.
So how does that all come together then for an organization?
So-
It's almost magical, like you say, but I'm curious.
Yeah,
How have you seen that coming
It
together?
does. That's what we do with a brand exercise. So we make them think about their user persona. We make them agree on an archetype. And then we start telling them that, okay, this is your archetype. You're saying that it's a combination of a hero and a sage, for example. So if that's your combination of a hero and a sage, how should that character look and feel and talk like? And if that character were writing something, how would that character write it? Right. And then, so the entire brand persona is a combination of what colors would be represented for the brand, what font types would be used, to the extent of what icons would be used. Okay, what voice, what kind of voice would it be? Would it be chirpy, airy? Would it be authoritative, humble? Right. So what it does is all of these combinations, like you rightly said, it evokes an emotion in you. Right. When you put when you put a certain kind of sentence in a certain font, on a certain background of colors in a picture with a certain kind of icon, it triggers an emotion in you. What that emotion is what we are trying to understand. And if that emotion is correctly measured and we get that is when the brand succeeds.
Nice. I think this is a beautiful way of, tying up the many layers or the many phases, I'd like to say, of branding. And if you were to teach branding, let's say to students who were just coming out of college, what would you tell them right now?
It's a science in itself, but it also is about observation. So it's a happy combination of scientific observation, where you're being very methodical and clear about what you're hearing and saying and distilling that information out into something. So it's like a vast array of information coming that you distill into the pockets that you want them to be. But it's also design aesthetics. It's also about you should always understand that a brand exercise, to be successful, has to be a team effort on both sides. And you need to know how to communicate with the client, and you need to know how to communicate with your team members, who all come with your own expertise into the exercise. If you do that and you learn how to, sense the cues, the ones that are said and the ones that are unsaid, that's all you need. You need to be a good listener to start with.
And there was also one point which I noted in the conversation earlier. It's about making sure that you are inclusive and getting others to be inclusive as well.
Absolutely. And being unbiased. The fact that they are allowed to be biased, but you cannot be biased. You cannot only hear what one person says just because that person is the perceived leader of the equation. There could be somebody who's sitting in the corner, who has not said a word but really knows his customer. You need to be able to draw out people to speak. You have to make them comfortable enough to be able to speak. And that is the task that you bring to the table.
Very quickly, how do you do that when you're in a remote branding session? How is it that you encourage everybody in that space to bring out their points of view?
Chitra, the way I do it most of the time is by by being the everyman. Okay, I sometimes ask, I would call stupid questions. Yeah, so I try to put myself in the shoe of the person who is silent there and come up with maybe vague questions that only that person can answer. Essentially to break the ice. But that only works if the company is free enough to allow everybody to speak. Okay? And regardless of whether it's a branding exercise or anything, if you want to draw out people, like we always say, Chitra, whether it's branding or learning or whatever, it has to be a safe space.
Yeah.
People to actually give out their opinion and talk with what they really believe is happening. To say that the emperor is walking naked, for example, you need to be in a safe space. Otherwise, you have to be an innocent, right? For that, you can try your best to make it a safe space that they are able to talk. But it also depends upon who they're sitting along with. But at least you should not intimidate the person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the only thing you can do.
And also not perhaps lead them towards an answer that
definitely.
you definitely want a question for, which also ties into a lot of what we say during conducting user research.
Yes.
It's like set aside your biases. And, and in some sense, this is a kind of user research exercise as well.
Exactly. Exactly. At the end of the day, the crux of a branding exercise is to define the user persona. That is it. Okay. Because unless you find... So somebody was asking me recently that what's the point of doing a user persona in the branding exercise? We are just finding our archetype. But your archetype, if you want the user to respond to you and actually listen to you, your brand archetype should be something that actually connects to the user. So if you don't understand your user, what brand archetype are you making?
And that's your purpose in the first place.
Exactly.
You exist as a company because you found a solution to a problem that
somebody wants.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to talk to that somebody. And what we, as a brand exercise or as a branding expert, what we are trying to do is help you define your persona, which will then attract that somebody to you, to listen to you. Because unless they listen to you, they don't have awareness. And without the awareness, you don't have conversion. Right. So, yeah, it's all about listening, wherever you're talking about.
Thank you, Linda. I feel like this was an interesting conversation in terms of understanding the process, the essence, the elements of what goes into, perhaps building a good brand, and also lessons from your experiences, which I think will be useful to a lot of listeners, even if they're just curiosity listeners. So this has overall been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chitra.
Please subscribe to the Aedge podcast on your favorite podcast channel. We are on Google, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. If you have stories to share and want to be featured on our podcast, write to us at podcasts@adepticlabs.com.